This is the Marketing Agency Power Hour, and I'm your host, Cal Wilder. Each week, we'll power through discussions on business challenges, success stories, and game-changing strategies. This show is sponsored by SmartBooks, provider of bookkeeping and accounting for marketing agencies. Let's get started. So I'm really excited to be speaking to today's guest. He's a podcast powerhouse, a media insider, a campaign creator, and an AI mastermind. He's led marketing strategy for events like the Forbes Under 30 Summit. He founded an AI-enabled podcast booking agency and is one of the sharpest minds in the modern podcast guesting and media strategy space. He's the founder and principal of Wonderfish, where he's the creator of the podcast Power Circuit. James Colistra, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cal. It's really great to be here.
So what's the single most powerful strategy for success in your firm these days?
Sure. So Wonderfish operates in the broad PR and marketing space, but what I think has allowed Wonderfish to be successful is really niching down, as you mentioned, into the podcast space and focusing right now on systemizing the podcast guesting experience. And we do that in a number of different ways using AI and technology, but there's also really heavy human element and storytelling element focus. So what I think that allows us to do is, as I mentioned, systemizing this entire podcast guesting experience so that our clients, founders, CEOs, people that have stories and expertise and want to build trust at scale, it allows them to essentially show up ready to go and do the interviews, and everything, all the work is kind of taken off their plate because obviously founders and CEOs are busy. So I think that's what's allowed Wonderfish to find some early success. And I say early because we're relatively new to the podcast world. Within the past 6 months, that's when we started to niche down into this podcast space.
Great. Yeah, I work with our production company on the podcast hosting side of things, which sounds maybe a little bit similar. They make it so easy for me. So shout out to Casey and his team at Ringmaster, but you're primarily focused on the guest side of things, right?
Sure. Yes. And at the same time, I mean, there's been plenty of hosts who have thanked me and even mentioned to my clients, oh, it's really great having Wonderfish and James because as much as we make it easier for the guests and prepare them, I mean, that's ultimately making it better for everyone, for not only the guests and not only the guests in the audience, but also the hosts themselves, who has someone that's showing up that's right fit and also is prepared, ready to go, as I mentioned, for the show. So
cool. So tell me more about what's the special sauce that you employ when you represent people who want to get on podcasts?
Well, we always start at the same spot, which is, any kickoff call that I conduct gets to the core and the essence of the client's story and messaging goals. And we create as much clarity as we can, not only for themselves for when they're going on the show, but for myself and my team, so we could identify the right shows. But prior to even getting there, we do also kind of, I would say, pride ourselves in identifying the right clients, because that's a huge part of it, right? You want to have people that have good stories to tell, that have some level of expertise. So it's not necessarily for anyone, although everyone, people like to say everyone has a story, which is very true. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're identifying individuals that do have something to say, whether it's something contrarian or they could add value to whatever that particular show might be. So we always start out with finding out exactly what their story is, because that's I mean, a lot of people have come on your show. I listened to a couple of past episodes, and they talked about how critical storytelling really is. And there's a science behind that. There's a number of reasons why. I mean, for ages, we use stories to make sense of obviously the world around us, and to I think there's like a sort of wired component of our brain that is ready to listen to a story, is ready to hear. They want to know what's going to happen next. And so that when we start talking to our clients, it's kind of like a mining session, sort of like a content mining session or whatever. And once we identify like what that story or message is, we always lead with that emotional trigger in the hook of the pitch that we're doing on their behalf. So that's really I think you asked for the secret sauce. I mean, I kind of just gave that away, but it's not rocket science. It's really just leading with a strong emotional hook and then finding the right shows. And that's the other secret sauce, which involves the AI. And there's kind of a combination of using AI because there's 500,000 active podcasts right now from the research that I've done within the past. When I say active podcasts, I mean within the past 30 days.
500,000, you said?
500,000, yeah. I mean, there's about 3 to 4 million total podcasts in the world as far as podcasts that were started. The problem is I think 90% of podcasts don't get past like the third episode. So there's a lot of stats around that because it's just very difficult to do a podcast. I mean, from experience, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of time, and it takes a long time to build momentum, right? And so I always talk to people about they'll come to me and they'll say, "Well, I'm not really sure. I'm thinking of starting my own podcast." And I'm always like not against starting a podcast. I think it's smart to build your own audience, but we're all about borrowing existing audiences. And so but the challenge really is identifying the right shows because the fact that there's 500,000 shows, it takes certain level of time and, you know, research, and you gotta do a lot of, whether it's reading descriptions and looking at all the data that's involved, and there's kind of a data play there, right? Um, and so I started out initially when I was focusing on podcasts using it off the shelf sort of SaaS platforms. There's a number of them out there, right? And it was working fine, but one of my core pillars or parts, one of the things that I always like to pride Wonderfish in, is core to our philosophy, is just being constantly, I call it continuous improvement. I mean, I didn't invent that term, but constantly trying to get better in every little area. Like if you can get 1% better at the research element or 1% better at the storytelling element. And I said to myself, all right, some of these tools that I'm using are fine, but I wanted to go a step further. And so that's when I started. I did find someone that focused on AI, basically using N8N, which is you create workflows and you create AI agents really. And so I built one of those with this individual, and it was working fine. But again, I wanted it to be better, and there was things about it I didn't love. And so then I took the JSON file, like, and I'm not a coder or anything. And this is the beauty nowadays with this vibe coding stuff. And I went to another tool called VO, which is made by Vercel, and we kind of, and I did a lot of this myself, but I recreated it, and so I have this new. It has more of a sleeker interface that you can use to identify the shows, and you input. It does have a data API with all these podcasts in the world, and then it scores them based off how well it aligns with a particular client's goals, whether it's the topical relevance. Those are the two sides of the coin. It's topical like alignment, and then the other side is reach and engagement.
It's interesting, right? You may have, and I think I'm curious, like the people you represent, what their goals are why they want to get on podcasts, right? Because I think for some people it may be, I want to record some episodes that position me as a subject matter expert, and I don't care so much about direct sales that result from it. I just want to have some credibility. And then other people like, I want to get in front of an audience that wants to buy my stuff, whatever that stuff is, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've probably heard the rule. I don't remember exactly who came up with this, but it's the 95-5 rule, where it's like 95% of your buyers aren't ready to buy at any given point in time, like whatever it is that you sell. So only 5%, or some will say it's even less than that. 3% are like they're ready to buy like whatever it is that you have, right? So I think the beauty of a podcast is it does allow you to kill two birds, where if you're trying to do the top of funnel awareness, thought leadership, build trust, it's a really good way to do that, especially because in this age of AI, we're competing with AI right now, right? As far as there's so much content that is created by AI. human conversations, the ability to do this and to have a one-on-one conversation and to get out there and speak and be yourself, that is a huge competitive advantage, and that allows people to eventually sell, right? The bottom of the funnel component. But at the same time, if what you're looking to do right away is get out there and sell something, whether it's a digital product, a book. I have clients that are launching books or just launch books. It's a great way to promote that. A podcast is another way to do that as well. As long as you have a really clear call to action, you can move people down the funnel and send them to a site and all that good stuff. So it's kind of a combination where it's not one or the other. It allows you to do a lot of different things. And so, but to answer your question, like as far as what exactly their goals are, I mean, it definitely varies, but for the most part, most of the clients that I talk to, they want more visibility. They want to build trust. They want to be an established expert in their field. So expertise is a word that comes up. And influence, I mean, influence is another word that comes up. And everyone has a different definition for what influence really means. But to me, it's basically the ability to change the way people think, feel, and act. So act is really the bottom of the funnel part, right? But the think and feel parts, those are kind of a little bit more wishy-washy, a little bit more like upper funnel thought leadership. So that's how I look at it.
Okay. And so you mentioned we were speaking the other week that one of the other keys in your business is mastering the art of cold outreach and communication, right?
Exactly.
So can you share a little information about that?
Yeah, and cold outreach, I mean, it kind of gets a bad rap because I mean, there's so much of that out there where you have people are inundated with, emails in their inbox and LinkedIn, and nobody wants to be pitch slapped, right? And so I think there's an art and a science to it. And I've found a really good way to do cold outreach. And as I mentioned, it's to me what's worked well. Like a lot of people say, oh, you need to personalize, and a lot of people are trying to use AI to do the personalization. By personalization, I mean, you could reach out to a podcast host and say like, oh, I heard so and so on this last episode, and I think my client or whatever their name is really speaks to the similar themes or whatever. And so I think some people have found success doing it that way. But I also sometimes I feel like that can feel forced, and people can start to read right through it and like, oh, this is an AI. Did they actually listen to the episode? Because at the end of the day, like, if you have how many shows you're pitching per day are really going to have time to go and like listen to every episode and be personalized and all that sort of stuff. So I like to be true and honest and not, make stuff up and pretend that my client was listening to an episode or whatever. So what I like to do is, like I said, lead with a really strong hook. We do personalize some components. Obviously, we're personalizing the first name, the name of the show, things of that nature. And then sometimes we'll get in there and change certain things as far as making it more relevant to whatever the particular theme is of that show. But for the most part, we're leading with, people can call it like a template, but that also gets a bad rap. But it's sort of like a cookie cutter pitch or whatever. But it's not cookie cutter because it's really, like I said, emotionally led. It leads with a really strong hook, and it's something that will make that individual stand out, and also will get the host, the reader, to want to continue to read the next sentence. That's the art of any copywriting, is to get someone to want to read the next sentence, right? And so, and it's also to increase the perceived value of the individual that you're writing about. And so that's what it really comes down to, what it's all about. But we do use right now we use Smart Lead for if we're doing any sort of email sequences. And I do have some off the shelf Podmatch is an example of like an off the shelf SaaS model tool that allows you to send cold outreach to podcast hosts. And that is one that I have had success with, and I'm not afraid to say it. Like, I combine it with my own tool. You know what I mean? So I'll use some Podmatch, because there are hosts sometimes that'll say, actually, I'd prefer you use this. Can you reach out to me on Podmatch? And I'm testing other tools as well. Matchmaker is another one. So.
It's interesting that you are embracing AI, yet at the same time, everybody thinks AI is a threat to their business, right? So part of me thinks there's no substitute for genuine one-on-one human interaction and discussion, and it's going to be a long time before AI can replace that. But at the same time, you could, in theory, probably record purely AI-driven podcast episodes without any humans and publish them if you really wanted to, right? But it's interesting. So I'm curious how you view AI as, a tool versus a threat.
And there are companies, I'm blanking on the name of one, but there's a couple companies that are trying to do that. And I've checked into it. I've listened to like what they're recording, and I honestly don't see it as a threat, at least right now, because of what I was saying before is I think humans, the number one advantage that we have as humans against AI in general is we have lived experiences. And now AI can go and pretend that, but I think people read through it. And I think even if an AI sounded just as good as a human, if someone found out or knew that it was an AI, in the back of their head, I feel like they're not going to want to listen to it. They want to connect and relate to humans. And and also I think it still isn't perfect yet where it still sounds, I think you could still tell the difference. I mean, that's my point of view, but um so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think that right now and I don't know if this will change or when it will change. I feel like humans have the advantage, and that is our competitive advantage right now, is the ability to tell stories, the ability to have lived experiences, things that were really impactful in our lives. And I'll give you an example of a story that I told that really resonated with people. And I started telling it on podcasts, and I guess I'm going to tell it right now because um, so I spent about a decade working at Forbes, and Forbes was a really great place to work. It was We felt like a family. It was sort of tight knit. We had 400 employees, but everyone kind of knew everyone. And I was very lucky because I was able to have a seat at the table with very senior people. I sat across the table from Steve Forbes when we were launching his podcast, and we talked about strategies or how we're going to basically target who we wanted to pitch this to, and to monetize it, because I was on the revenue side, right? But we worked really closely with the editorial side. And I also worked really closely with Randall Lane, Chief Content Officer. You mentioned in the beginning of the show, I helped launch Under 30 Summit, and we did a lot of really cool things together with the marketing revenue side and the editorial side. And I mean, even there was this one moment a few years back when Steve Forbes was turning 70, and his daughter asked my wife, or asked me to ask my wife, if she could bake a cake for his birthday, because she bakes these like beautiful cakes she was just doing as a hobby. So I have all these amazing memories, and my kids were able to come to Forbes all the time, and like they loved it because there was free snacks, and they just thought it was cool. Like they got to go in the studio and like pretend that they're recording, and things like that. Um, so anyway, long story short, I was there for almost a decade, and so much of my identity was tied to Forbes, and I never really thought about it that way. But in retrospect, I think it was a little bit dangerous because the rug kind of got pulled up from under me in January 2024, because there was a layoff, and I was affected by this layoff. And I remember talking to my kids about it, and my 8-year-old daughter was telling her all about it, and she was like, "Why would they get rid of you? You're the best." And I was like, that like kind of hit hard. I was like, "Oh my God," like I feel like I let her down a little bit. And I was like, "Yeah, you're right, but just it's business. Just try to move on and try to do what I could." But it was really hard for a while, and ultimately I did start Wonderfish, and that allowed me to realize that what my mission really was all about was similar to what I was doing at Forbes, and what Forbes does is to give experts and people that have the ability or the desire to change the world a platform. And that's become my passion. And it didn't matter that I wasn't at Forbes anymore, right? I was able to do it. I have a different logo behind me, Wonderfish, and thank you to my wife for making me my sign. But um, the logo doesn't necessarily matter. The brand doesn't necessarily matter. It's really about the mission and the core of really what you want to do, right? And so that was my story. And I actually was afraid to tell that for the longest time. And I've started working with this woman by the name of Nicole Ramirez. She's pretty big on LinkedIn. She's got like 30,000 plus followers because she writes really real content, this very humorous. And she was also laid off from Forbes. And I started getting her on some podcasts, and she started to tell that story. And it kind of inspired me because I was keeping it to myself. I was afraid really that I was going to make me look bad. I was going to be, have this negative stigma. Nobody wants to kind of be looking, you don't want to look like, you were thrown away or whatever. And I started to like change my viewpoint. I was like, look, I wasn't the only one. Like, it's part of business. There's all these dynamics, AI and everything's changing. Like, I was on the creativity side. You don't necessarily need as many people when you have AI fueling and speeding up this, I guess, time it takes to come up with ideas. So I ended up telling my story, and all these people came to me after, and they were emailing me, or mostly LinkedIn messaging. Like, that really resonated. Like, thank you for sharing that. And so that's kind of my message to people is like, don't be afraid to tell your story, especially if it's something really vulnerable, because that's what's going to connect to people the most. People love the vulnerability. They love, anytime you're, just sharing a personal experience. And that's what, kind of back to your question, like, that's what we have as humans that AI doesn't have. So,
Yeah, that vulnerability aspect is key. And I look back at my own career, and I was lucky enough. We started a business. I started a business with a couple partners in my early mid 20s, and we ended up selling it to a Fortune 500 company, and it was a nice ride. And some after the deal, we had two or three people I'm thinking of. They were let go for one reason or another by the new owner, and they went off and they started their own businesses and were wildly successful, and a lot more successful than they would have been if they kept working at the bottom, the mid-level of this big Fortune 500 company. And so they probably hated it at the time, but in hindsight, they'd probably say it's one of the best things that ever happened to them.
yeah, and at the time, I remember, I was getting all these text messages. Even like the CEO at the time, his name's Mike Faderly. He texted me like the sweetest thing. He was just like, he kind of said exactly what you just said, that, I've gone through this before, and it ended up being like, best thing and worked out for the better. And like, at the time, it was like hard to believe that, because you're like, oh, you kind of like, woe is me. But I mean, I think he's right. And that's, I did start to see it as a positive, and as it, now I had this new chance, or this new clean slate, because before I was probably just going to keep working at Forbes, even though, um, to a certain extent, my growth was not paused, but I was just doing a lot of the same thing for a really long time, being there for a decade. So I think the ability to grow is much higher. There's a lot of risk involved, but I also started to see the risk of getting back into the workforce as even higher, especially with the amount of layoffs and things like that. So I was just like, you know what, I'm going to do it.
I love the sign, by the way. I love the colors. Those are the smart colors.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's actually made out of real wood. My wife ordered on Etsy, and she surprised me, which is really cool.
Yeah, you mentioned your wife has been an integral part of getting Wonderfish off the ground, right?
Yeah, she's always been very supportive, and I think that every story has, you hear like the hero's journey. Not that I'm a hero by any means, but there's always like a guide or mentor. Not that she's my mentor or guide, but she's someone that has been there for a tremendous amount of support. I also have a business coach, Diego Barrera, who's helped me with a lot of the different processes along the way. So I think it's always important to have, people in your corner that can back you up. And she was the one, my wife was the one who basically just told me like, build the business, because I was going back and forth, still applying for jobs for the longest time. And once I had her, it was like, I think a text message she sent me. Once I had her buy-in, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then also she got me the sign, and I was like, okay, now I feel like I really have your support. Now I got to go, and I got to do this. Now I got to go sell. And so, yeah, I mean, it's tremendously lucky, just to have a good support system behind me.
you've been talking some about what you do for clients and how you help position them for success. I'm curious what are your goals with Wonderfish? What are your dreams for your own business over the next few years?
Sure. As I mentioned, my main mission and passion is giving individuals who have stories, or not just stories, but they have their own dreams, their own desires to influence people, change the world, um, to give them a platform. And so my vision is not necessarily just to focus on podcasts. I feel like right now that's what I'm optimizing. As I mentioned, this, systemizing the podcast guesting experience. But eventually I am thinking about expanding once I have the podcast whole thing mastered. I feel like there's other opportunities, and a lot of my clients already are starting to ask about events. I mean, when I was at Forbes, we did a ton of really, really influential events, putting people on stages. Um, and that could be virtual as well, right? So I'm thinking about events, thinking about some clients have already asked about corporate speaking gigs. And then, I mean, there's other things beyond speaking that do a lot of the same thing as far as building trust and thought leadership. One of it is like, for example, writing books. So, I'm not an author by any means, but I could have a whole suite of options where I bring people who are experts at writing books, and like get you on a fast track to do that. So I haven't decided exactly what all the different platforms or elements are, but my point is I'm not necessarily going to be tied to podcasts. As far as, like, that's what I'm thinking about. Who knows? I may at some point change my mind and say, "You know what? Podcasts are where it's at. I'm just gonna stick to this." But, I'm just thinking about broadly growing and, going beyond. But really right now, I'm kind of, zeroing in and narrowed in on the whole podcast guesting experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I could see the benefit of kind of a one-stop shop if you're trying to build a personal brand. Well, you write a book, podcast, do some speaking gigs, maybe host an event. Yeah,
And I'm gonna start doing a lot more, speaking coaching where I bring in experts to help me with that. And the more and more I do that or have workshops, I feel like the better it's gonna make me, and maybe give me more ability to help coach my clients and get better at, just getting out there and speaking, because I've already started to discuss that with a couple of, professional speaking coaches, and I haven't tied up all the loose ends, but it's something that I've been thinking about. Is maybe it's either a combination of, some paid workshops, some free workshops. So it could potentially be a revenue stream, or it could just be a way to bolster my clients, make them better speakers, which helps everyone in the long run.
so I assume a lot of your clients are either executives or business owners.
Correct. I would say so. My ICP tends to be founders and CEOs. Smaller companies between it could be anywhere between a few employees, but it tends to be 10 to 50 for the most part. But eventually, I'm starting to talk to some individuals at larger companies, but I'm just kind of starting somewhere, starting with like a smaller CEO founder. And then also I'm talking to a lot of just like coaches and consultants, and working with a lot of coaches and consultants. I have one woman who's a health and fitness, health and wellness coach. I have an individual who is sort of like project management type of individual, works on the construction side. And then I have a guy who has a coaching company called Boss Up, but he has like 85 coaches working underneath him. He just launched a book. His name's Scott Abbott. So tech is another big area, or big category for me. So I have a client, Mitchell Jones. He has a company called Lava that it's like an AI startup that basically is, I guess, a payment platform that helps AI startups with the whole payment, having a payment solution. And so technology. Another individual has a company called Workmate, it's like an AI scheduling assistant, which is pretty cool. And I'm actually playing around with that as one of the tools that I'm testing. You copy your scheduling assistant as like they're an executive assistant. So yeah, technology, coaching, um, and I'm signing a whole bunch more. I just signed like 2 more clients last week. So that's pretty much the core though, and I think eventually I could expand, but I just try to keep it focused right now.
And so you're in this niche where you're the guru of the podcasting at the moment, right? And these folks probably have other marketing agencies that handle digital media, social media, advertising, whatever. So do you tend to partner with other marketing agencies or?
Yeah, I do partner with I've talked to some, and it's kind of been an area that it's a little bit untapped, and that's a big reason why I wanted to come on here, because I know a big part of your audience obviously is marketing agency owners. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, whether, there's whether it's like a referral agreement, or referral partnership type of thing, or if a marketing agency owner wants to go on podcasts themselves, I'm happy to work with them. Or if it's something where I'm just basically like getting their clients on these podcasts, and they're using me as like a vendor. I think there's a lot of different ways we can go about it, but that's something that I've started to explore, and I've had some really good conversations, but haven't actually enacted any like real real work or agreements that has really come from that. But I'm excited to do something like that for sure.
Cool. So what's a challenge you're facing or something you recently had to overcome?
Yeah, I had the biggest challenge that happened to me. So in the beginning of launching this, as I mentioned, I do a lot of cold outbound. And so I was using Instantly, which is a, cold out instantly.ai. It's a cold outbound email platform. And I did something where you set up so when you're emailing anyone as part of like a cold outbound program, you don't want to use your own email, because you could hurt the domain reputation if it's like, I'm not spamming people, but you never know. Like someone could say, "Oh, this is annoying. I'm gonna like mark this as spam," or whatever. You just got to be careful you're not um, harming your actual business email. And so what you do is you create however many, create like 8 different domains. They're like variations of your domain. So, wonderfishpr.com, wonderfish labs, like whatever it is. And Instantly has a way that it's called done for you emails, where you basically just tell them the domains, you buy it through them, and they set it all up for you, instead of like going directly to Google or Microsoft Outlook and setting up the email domains yourself. And someone I was talking to was like, "Yeah, I did that. It worked great for me." So I went and did it, and it was working for a while. I was sending some campaigns for my clients, and then one day I get this like email from Instantly, and it was like, "Oh, there was like a automated sweep where Google went and like took down emails." It's like they're like, "It wasn't anything that you did wrong," but they didn't really tell me why. And I did a little bit more research, and I came to find out that when you buy these done for you emails, they're basically buying from, and don't quote me on this. I'm not like the email expert, but like they buy from some sort of like reseller system where you basically get tied into like a pool of other individuals. And if they do something wrong with their email, your email could get taken down. And I don't know, I just kind of got annoyed by the whole situation. And I just said, okay, you know what? Like they gave me my money back. And I ended up I wanted to test Smart Lead. That's why I moved over to Smart Lead. And I think that it was a lesson for me, and I ended up just buying from then on. I only buy emails myself, and I go directly to Google to buy them. And for me, that was a lesson of like, don't cut corners if you don't have to. And what I always try to do is like do as much research as I can. Do do it the right way, even if it takes a little bit more time. Unless it's like a significant investment, don't cut a corner. And it actually reminds me of my time. I don't think I mentioned this to you when we talked last time. I mean, we talked a little bit about our love for barbecue, but and I love hot sauce too. But I actually, at one point in time, I launched my own spicy ketchup company. It was called Farmer Jim's Ketchup, and I was making this. I was renting out a commercial kitchen, and I had this whole recipe, and then I was trying to scale it, and then I started talking to this company that was basically like they call it like a co-packer, who like they'll produce it for you. And they were doing a prototype, and they were like, "Oh, it's much more expensive to use apple cider vinegar. You should use white." And I started to use it, and then it ended up being like a disaster. Like, didn't taste like my product, and I felt like I wasted a whole bunch of time. Moral of the story is like it reminded me of being in that situation where you're always trying to figure out what's the best way to produce this product, right? So whether it's a product or service, in a way that is going to obviously deliver on the promise of what you're selling it as, that's cost effective, but at the same time, if you're cutting a corner and it's something that you don't feel good about, it's like deep down inside, like, oh, I should be doing it this way. Like I should be using the apple cider vinegar, and I like that was a regret I had at the time, and so that's one of the things that's kind of sticking with me. Of like when you're in business, do the hard work, do the research, do it the right way. It's okay to make mistakes, but also find out this is another important thing that I learned is like find a way to minimize your exposure to risk. And so for example, if I was doing everything with instantly and I made that mistake, I would be in a really, all my clients were tied to those email infrastructures that got deleted. There goes my business. It's going to take me weeks to build up the emails, right? And so that's something that I've been doing lately is like minimizing my exposure to risk across all the different parts of my business. And so email infrastructure is one of them. Now I have Smartly, but I have other ways that I use Podmatch. I'm using, I said I'm testing Matchmaker. I have, other LinkedIn. I have other ways that I'm reaching out to these podcast hosts. It's not just one way.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny how you mentioned, yeah, it reminded me of just trying to figure out what you need to be really good at and what you're okay being bad at. So with like your barbecue recipe, the apple cider vinegar seemed like a core part of the recipe, and if you replaced it, it would be bad, right? But and maybe there are other parts of life where you can substitute a cheaper ingredient, no big deal, nobody cares. But if it's part of your core product and it's part of what makes you really good, then you have to spend that extra 5, 10, 20% because it's part of what makes you great. And then there are other areas where you might be okay. Yeah, I'm not very good at this. I'm going to cheap out, but my customers don't really care.
Exactly. And I think that's where you kind of learn takes time, right? To figure out like what are the components, like what is like the core of like what people like about you, and don't ever cop out there. I think that makes a whole lot of sense.
So I need to ask you a couple questions about bookkeeping and finance, since that's my day job. So I'm curious how you go about managing the books for your firm, and what kind of metrics and reports you like to get to stay on top.
Well, I mean, you just mentioned like knowing what you're good at. I know for a fact that finance is one thing that I'm not good at. Like, there's a couple of things I'm not good at, but I know for a fact that I'm not good at finance. Um, and so I just started using QuickBooks, but I'm very, very behind and like limited in like all the financial aspects of my business. So, I definitely want to have another conversation with you about that. But yeah, I don't know that I have anything that I could share that's really like of value there because I'm just really far behind. But that's on my it's been on my to-do list for a while. I do have an advisor that I use through I don't know if you're familiar with Score, and he's like a former banker, and he's been telling me for a while like you need to have income statement and you need to know like your financial projections. We just had a call last week, and that was one of the things that came up, and I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm just like doing a million things, and like right now I'm behind on that. So, um,
I'm trying to sell some new business to keep the lights on.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of chicken or the egg, but like now the business is really finally picking up where I need to get on that. So, yeah, for a while I was struggling and just like when I started, I was really only just doing a lot of like testimonial clients when I was just focusing on podcasts because I was trying to learn the business, trying to learn the industry. And it is such a tight knit sort of community in the podcast space. I mean, you have a number of different people on, within the ecosystem. You have, I don't know if you're familiar with listen notes, but that's one sort of metric. I mean, in a way they're kind of like the Nielsen of podcasts where they have like data on the percentages of every podcast in the global ranking. But there's also a lot of like confusion and I think it's almost kind of like gatekeeping where like no one really knows how many downloads everything has. So you kind of just at a whim, at the whim of what the public data and signals tell you. So I use a combination of different signals. Listen notes is one of them. Social engagement is another one.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, 'cause I was just having a conversation with my podcast producer last week about this Power Hour podcast series, and they're like, "Yeah, you got, like, thousands of views on YouTube." I'm like, "I can't believe thousands of people watched the episode. What does that really mean? Did they, like, view the beginning? Did they go a minute into it? Did they see the image but didn't have to click play? Like, how do you measure it? I don't know."
Yeah, and the other thing is like a lot of people don't. I've heard mixed signals where people will say that because you know how the download has become the sort of pseudo metric of like how well your podcast is doing, but not everyone's downloading podcasts. And then someone said to me, well, actually, a view or a stream is technically download. And then someone else said, no, that's not true. So I'm still trying to figure out a lot of that stuff out. But what I tell people is, my clients is I don't rely on one particular signal. So YouTube is one of them, but there's plenty of podcasts that are doing extremely well within the podcast, but then there's not a lot of people listening on or watching on YouTube. So that's why it's always a combination. It's never just like leaning heavily into just YouTube or leaning heavily into just what the listen notes ranking percentage is. So yeah, analytics are, I think, a huge part of my business, but the financial analytics, that's where I'm behind, and we need to have another conversation. So yeah, I'm definitely a little bit behind on that, a lot behind.
So I gotta ask you about baseball. I see in your background you've got several baseballs. You're a big baseball fan, or
Yeah, I'm a pretty big baseball fan. I just collect like some of those I got from games and things like that. Technically a Yankee fan, but I'm not like diehard someone that watches every game. I'm more of a Giants fan, and been to like a number of different practices and games and stuff for the Giants. I mean, I go to Yankee games because I'm not too far. I'm in New Jersey. But are you a big baseball fan?
no? Baseball is one sport I really don't. I'm not really into.
Yeah, sometimes I just have it in the background. It's something to have on, and that's not till the fall that I really get into it. But yeah, football is more my sport for sure.
So you're running your own business these days, and I know you had a good run as a W-2 manager at other companies. I'm curious. I know you got laid off, and then you were trying to find the right opportunity, and eventually put up your own shingle and are running Wonderfish now. I'm curious, have you ever thought when you were little James, if you thought you'd be running your own business one day?
That's pretty funny. So, my dad ran a business. I mean, he was an insurance agent, but I wasn't necessarily like I wouldn't say like wasn't entrepreneurial. Like it wasn't. Besides my ketchup business, I didn't ever really think that I was going to be an entrepreneur. And it's weird because I was working at Forbes, and prior to that, I was also at The Economist, and I was always around these like really successful, I guess, founders, if you want to use that term, and entrepreneurs, right? And I always kind of saw myself as an outsider, really. And I was just a kid. I mean, I grew up in upstate New York, grew up on a farm. We didn't own the farm. We had like 5 acres of land, and there was a farmer that used some of the land for like cow corn or whatever. It's like this is rural upstate New York. Like our closest neighbor was probably like a mile away. But we had a great childhood. I ran around with my brother. I had two brothers shooting BB guns. Sometimes we're shooting them at each other. Like that's a whole other story. And just like being crazy kids, riding our bikes, playing basketball in the barn, building hay forts. And so when I grew up and came to New York City, came to big city, I kind of I always just felt like I not that I didn't belong, like I always knew that I was really creative, and like, maybe my intelligence is like kind of I'm not an idiot, but I felt like I was sort of like average intelligence. I'm not like a, Harvard grad, or like some of these people that I was hanging out with were just like the creme of the creme. And so I was always in awe being at Forbes and like meeting And I didn't take a lot of pictures of a lot of these people too, because you didn't want to like feel like you're that guy of like, the fanboy or whatever. The one picture that I do have that I'm happy to say that I have it because my kids are impressed, is Logan Paul. We were at one of the under 30 summits in Boston at like the State House in Boston. I have a selfie with me and Logan Paul. But I was me, like Howard Schultz walked in the office to record Steve Forbes' podcast, just like a number of different, like we had John Oates from Hall & Oates like performed for our company. It was just like really cool to be there. There's another what's his name? David Blaine came in and did like a whole like magician show, like just crazy stuff, right? But I always felt like, okay, that's them. That's not me. Like I'm not a founder. I'm not ever gonna be this big successful founder. And so it wasn't until I had that identity shift, like when I left Forbes, that I started to see myself that way and was like, because to me, it was always kind of just like a side hustle of something like doing this catch up thing while I'm working at Forbes. Like it wasn't something that I put a lot of time, commitment, or focus on. So it wasn't until I had that mental shift and mindset shift where I was like, okay, I can do this. This could be a big part. This could be me. And I could build something and do this as a career. That was sort of a later in life thing. As a kid, I always just thought about, I did want to work in advertising because I was creative. But part of that, I thought about being an actor, being a lawyer, like all these different things. So, it's kind of all over the place.
Cool. Is there anything you feel like you've learned the hard way over the last couple of years of running your own show that you would do differently?
I would, so I, I'm, as I mentioned, I'm a very creative person. I've had to build the skill of being process oriented. And I had to do that at Forbes because once I moved into a management role, there's so many, we worked off RFPs that were coming in from all these big brands. And it was our job as managers to make sure that these RFPs are being answered and there was like a process in place. And so I learned working there and even some of my earlier jobs that you have to have a good process in place. And so like at Forbes, we use Smartsheet, which is like a project management system. And we had to have, SOPs and everything, steps of like, once this comes in, this is who handles it. This is like, they put it on this spreadsheet, which syncs with this. And, you have to have all these back end processes. And I think I knew that I had to do that with Wonderfish, but I was a little bit slow to have like really good processes. And I'm finally getting the processes locked in where I'm working with a HubSpot automation partner and they're automating a lot of the back end things. But I wish I did that a little bit sooner. Because I feel like I could have scaled much quicker if I had these processes, automated quicker and everything like just running. But I was so focused on like the sales side, the marketing side, you're wearing a million different hats, right? But I would say that process orientation needs to be one of the number one. Besides, I mean, people always say sales is the most important because if you don't have sales coming in, you're not gonna, you're gonna die as a business. But in the beginning, that's not even the most important to me because I feel like you can, obviously you might need to have a little bit of savings or runway or whatever, but you can just have testimonial clients just to test out your system and put them through the ringer of like making sure everything works and everything is optimized. And so that to me is like the number one has to be the number one priority, especially today where, resources are always going to be thin. Like labor is expensive. You can't go off and just hire hundreds of people, especially really good labor. But I think right away you want to optimize those processes and automations off the bat.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like sales are key. If you don't sell anything, you don't eat. But at the same time, you need those initial sales to be successful to build a referenceable customer base and prove that what you're doing is valuable, right? So you have to kind of do both.
Yep, for sure. So that combination is key. But one of my other tenets is just like, I think I mentioned continuous improvement, but it's just like never accepting mediocrity because that was one of the things I felt that I guess noticed in the corporate world for a long time is like, there's a lot of people, I'm not going to name any names or anything. There's just people in general, just in the corporate world that just sort of seem to just accept, the status quo. Like that's just the way we've always done it. Or this is just, yeah, this is fine, right? It's like it's not optimal, right? But like at the end of the day, like we're getting paid, the job is getting done. And I think when you have your own business, that mindset definitely shifts where it's like I said in the beginning, if I could do this 1% better, I'm gonna do it. I'm always trying to improve, do things better. Don't just like say this is just the best that it's gonna get. Like I'm continuously and constantly improving every different area of my business. And the next area, Cal, is gonna be the finances. So
All right. Well, we'll talk about that more. Yeah, it's interesting though you mentioned that because I have limited experience. I worked for about 18 months or so for Staples after they acquired my IT services business. And Staples is, in my opinion, the best managed of the office supply businesses. And a lot of the competitors went bankrupt, and Staples still doing fine. But I will say though, became all about hitting your budget for the year, not about maximizing, opportunity and taking advantage of opportunities. It's all about here's what we committed to do this year. Let's make sure we deliver what we said we were going to do. We don't have to do more than that, but we can't do less than that. And so it's a different mindset. And I respect that mindset. You're a public company, you got investors, you can't take too many risks that people are not expecting you to take. It's a big deal if you come up way short of your annual goals. But at the same time, I'm used to a little smaller, nimbler environments where it's all about what's the opportunity and how do we capitalize on that opportunity.
exactly, and being customer focused because sometimes that gets lost when you're just trying to like please your boss or please the shareholders or whoever it is that you're presenting to, at the town hall or whatever it might be. So I think that when you're a founder, you're much closer to the customer too. Like, the manager is at a big corporate, uh, Staples, as use that as an example. I mean, how often are they like on the floor talking to like the customers and actually seeing like what the experience is, right? There's kind of sometimes a disconnect. And not all the time, but it depends on the executive or the leader or whatever. But I think the fact that like I'm in the weeds, I'm working with customers, and I think one of the things I did from the beginning is really wait to hire help because I want to do everything in the beginning myself. So, when a podcast opportunity comes up, I know how to create a report that reviews all the information, looks at all the past guests and hosts or whatever, and so that I can develop the right system and the right process for that. And I know what it takes to do it, how much time it takes, and how much AI to use, how much human part to use. And so I think that's key as well.
Cool. So I got to ask you about barbecue since that's near and dear to my heart. I know we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but what do you like to grill?
Lately, I've been keeping it simple. I'm just doing a lot of like chicken, like my Traeger. I just noticed because I used to have the Acorn Kamado. Well, I still have it out there. It's kind of like a poor man's big green egg. It's not ceramic. It's like steel or whatever. It still does a really good job. And I said one day that I wanted to get the Traeger. Just my brother had one, and people make fun of it sometimes. It's like the easy bake oven of barbecue, but when you're busy, you don't have time to sit out there and tend to the fire and all. It's just set it wherever you want. So, yeah, I mean, I've been doing like I didn't used to love just doing like chicken thigh, like bone on chicken thighs, but what I do is I take the skin off myself, but keep the bone in, and then put the seasoning on, and I put it on the Traeger for a couple hours, like 2 to 3 hours, like 250, 225, and then 250. And it's just like really good chicken. And my kid loves that. I put some like Cajun seasoning on it. But this summer I want to start to perfect the brisket because like that's one thing I haven't really gotten good at. I'm sure you do a lot of that, right?
Yeah, I've done a number of briskets. Everybody says briskets are hard, and in some ways they're hard, but in some ways they're like anything. If you just keep it 225 to 250 for some number of hours, eventually it softens up and tastes awesome. But there's some intricacies with the brisket though to try to keep it moist and not dry it out. And yeah, so it takes some work.
And what's your go-to smoker right now?
My favorite, I own I guess you'd say, for smokers and grills. But I got one traditional propane grill, and then I have a propane smoker, which is nice. But you have to, it's big capacity. So if I'm doing a bunch of pork shoulders or something, I can fit it all in there, no problem, or a bunch of ribs, no problem. But you have to manage the temperature over the course of the day. Then I have my set it and forget it electric smoker. So if I need to leave home and go do something for a few hours, I can just put it in the electric and it's going to be fine. And then I've got my favorite, which takes the most work, but it's the Santa Maria grill, which it's got a crank wheel where you can raise and lower the grill surface over regular wood smoke. So you have your logs in there, they're cooking, and you can raise and lower the heat surface, between like 1 and 3 feet. So I really love that. It takes work. It's very easy to overcook things. But it's a lot of fun, just especially in summertime. You just kind of sit out there, listen to some podcasts, watch a game, tend to the meat on the grill. It's fun.
Exactly. That's what I love about it. That's really cool. I think you need to come out with a barbecue podcast next.
I did one of my first episodes of my other podcast, Empowering Healthy Business, was with a barbecue pitmaster in the summer of 2023, 2024, maybe. He was a medalist at I can't even remember the name of one of the big national barbecue competitions. So that was fun to talk to him.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that.
But hey, James, I really appreciate the time and you sharing your story and some of the vulnerability. And I think for everybody listening, as you can tell, running kind of a podcast production and booking business like James does, it's a specialty. So if you've got clients that want to be on podcasts and you need somebody to manage it, reach out to James because he's an expert at it. And I know a lot of agencies don't necessarily have that expertise in-house. So James, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my website is wonderfish.xyz. I do have an assessment on there, which I'd love people to do, which I'm actually going to be updating it to make it. Right now, it's a way to assess how, I guess, good you are at the world of podcast guesting. But I think I'm going to broaden a little bit to just make it more about how good at building trust you are. It's sort of like an assessment tool for that. But for now, it's like focused on podcast guesting. So wonderfish.xyz is my website. And I'm also, my biggest social platform is definitely LinkedIn. I'm on X, but not really using it. I'm starting to get on Substack. So if you want to follow me on there or whatever, subscribe. I guess I'm starting to like Substack a lot. I love the user interface of the blogging component compared to LinkedIn. I just think it's much easier to use. Like you can embed.
If you want to publish real content, like of any direct length and duration, and have like real discussion, thoughtful discussion, not just like 50 characters here or there. I love Substack.
Yeah. They have a podcast. I mean, I'm not a podcast host, but I think if you're a podcast host, you can publish them on there too now, I'm pretty sure. And, they also have a notes component, which is kind of like their version of Twitter. And then also, I think what I love about it is like, you can embed video really easily into like the post or the blog post itself. So if you post whenever you do an episode, you could post an article about it on there and you can embed the video. It's like, could be really cool. And then it's another way to get SEO and, get eyeballs out there. So, but yeah, Substack, LinkedIn, James Colistra, Colistra. I'm the only James Colistra in the world that I can say with confidence because there's a lot of Italians, but with my name, but there's no Jameses yet. So
awesome. Well, everybody listening, if you've enjoyed this episode, please tell your peers about it. Let's spread the word here, support each other. Thanks again, James. Really appreciate your time and insights.
Yeah, keep doing this podcast. It's a really good podcast. You're doing amazing work. I've loved all the guests that you've had. I've listened to a bunch of them. So my pleasure to be on the show.
Great. Well, this has been another exciting episode of the Marketing Agency Power Hour. We'll see you all next time. Another episode in the books. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes and more, please visit marketingagencypowerhour.com. This show is sponsored by SmartBooks, providing marketing agencies with bookkeeping, accounting, and finance support. With SmartBooks, you gain the clarity and confidence to make your agency a success. Until next time,